Welcome, everybody. We're especially delighted to have one of our own speaking today. And that, of course, is Professor Jia Reisha, who has just recently written a book, a very interesting book on the Chinese Gaokao, the college entrance examination, and the impact that it has on China and the world. Many of you will know Professor Jia, of course, but I just want to briefly introduce her. She's a PhD in economics from Stockholm, and she serves in several leadership positions here, but also she does incredibly interesting work on a variety of topics, particularly relating to institutions and growth, development, individual trajectories, and the political economy of ideas, and lately science and technology as well. Reisha, it's delightful to see you in this capacity. We're looking forward to your talk.
Okay. Thanks a lot for the introduction and for the opportunity. I feel like, presenting to my family members. It kind of feels special. Okay. Let me share with you a little bit about the book. I started to work with Hongbin Li at Stanford and Claire, who was undergraduate and played a very important role in this project. I'll tell you why. And it was published a few months ago. So for this audience, right, I don't need to motivate that education is important in China and Chinese are obsessed with education. And many of you might even grow up in the Chinese education system. So we wrote this book trying to provide a kind of a lens to understand this system. And you can use this lens to analyze many phenomena you are interested in or sometimes puzzled at. So we all know that Chinese are obsessed with the education. In this world of AI, we are curious whether AI knows this. This is just for fun, and it's not surprising that ChatGPT also knows this. So this is a promote asked about what's the top meal time conversation in China and in the US. And you'll see that, not surprisingly, children's education and academic performance is the number one topic in conversation, whereas in the US, it's not one of the top topics people think about. And this obsession with education is not only about talking and thinking, it's also about a lot of energy, money, resources spent on education. And these are some data from large-scale household survey across different countries and calculated the exponential share on children's education. And just to show you that, China also stands out in this investment, private investment. These are families' investment in children's education rather than government spending. If you look at government spending, China is just the average country in the world, about 4% of GDP. And obviously, Gaokao is the kind of peak of this obsession. And we would all agree that at the heart of the Chinese education system, it is the exam system, right? And the Gaokao is the peak of this exam system. And that's why we picked this as our title, but the book started with the Gaokao, but trying to understand the whole system. And this, as you know, the system has a long history, right? It can be dated back to the Kegyu system, which can be traced to at least 600 AD. And today's Gaokao, the version was actually created in 1950s, was stopped during the Cultural Revolution, and restarted again in 1977. And in the book, we show that all these two systems shares a lot of parallel and the similar political logic. For instance, I just give you one idea. Like today, many people complain about these regional cultures, but for unequal ideas. Right? So if you come from one region, like Beijing or Shanghai, you are much more likely to go to a good college. If you come from, say, Henan or Shandong, these provinces. And this kind of culture has started in the Ming Dynasty. That's like 500 years ago. And I would explain to you, what's the logic of having such a system. And so, motivated by this question, Hongbin and I have been doing research for over 15 years. It's even longer. In Hongbin's case, he's 12 years older than me. So education, we study education, but we know that education is important in everywhere, right? It's not only in China. So we ask ourselves, what makes Chinese education system distinctive, right? Why are Chinese are so obsessed with the exam system? Why the system is so resilient for over thousands of years, is still used today? And how such education system related to the broad Chinese society? So we want to just provide a kind of framework to understand the system. And then once you have the framework, you can use it to discuss different implications at the macro level, including like, how does education help or hinder China's global power, especially in this age of US-China competition? And what happened or will happen when the exam empire expands, meaning that when more and more Chinese immigrate to other countries, including the US. As we know, there's such a cultural tensions in terms of thinking about how the different education system. And we also ask ourselves, how should we teach our children and students if we know how this system works? And that motivates our book. This book it's intended to written for the general public, so it has no table, no figure, just plain English, and that's where Claire helps us a lot in this regard. And we also share our own personal experiences. It's not that we love ourselves. It's more like when I was young, I tend to think I was special. But as I grow older and older, I just realize that actually my experience and trajectory is largely basically shaped by this broader system and institutions. So we use our own experiences as examples to see how individual trajectory were largely shaped by the broad institutions. And as I emphasized, is try to provide a lens you can wear to understand the different phenomena of the Chinese society. We also include dedicated chapters on the China's global power and this relationship with the education system, and talk about how this Chinese education and this exam culture affect American education and society with the Chinese immigrants coming. And as you see, the book is very short, actually. It's very easy to read, but it's very broad. It covers family, state, and society. So in today's talk, I just want to share this framework we characterize as, we call it like a centralized hierarchical tournament. That is how we understand Chinese education, and I explain what it means and what with this framework, how families, government, and society behave in this system. And then with this framework, then you can discuss different implications. This includes what's the implication for the economic power of the country, what happens with the immigration in the US, and also talk a little bit this question that in the mind of many people, like, does Chinese education, does this exam system stifle creativity or not? Okay, so let me first explain this characterization, this three words, centralized, hierarchical, tournament. So I first start with hierarchical, for people like you, grow up in China or generally in East Asia, you are familiar with this hierarchical structure of the society. Historically, the hierarchy is very clearly defined in these four classes, right? The gentry is on the top, business is on the bottom, and if you pass the exam, you become part of the gentry, right? You work for the state, and that's the top of the hierarchy. Today's hierarchy is much more complicated, right? It could be hukou. If you have Beijing and Shanghai hukou, you have a higher status than me with the Shandong hukou, for instance. And in different profession, migrant workers, professors, different income, even education itself is a hierarchy, right? It's a very complicated hierarchy, as all of you know, right? It's like there's this at the top of the hierarchy, there's Beida and Tsinghua, but they're endless, right? Tiers of this pyramid. And one thing that is striking is that despite so many changes in Chinese economy in recent decades, something seems to be very, very persistent. So one phenomenon is this young people's preference to work for the state. And these are some numbers Hongbin's team has collected when he was at Tsinghua each year. they asked the college graduates from across 100 colleges in China, asked for what's their ideal jobs, if a sector to work for if they could. And you will see that working for the state sector, this includes for the government, public institution, SOE, state-owned enterprises, is the most ideal job for the young graduates. And this stopped in 2015, but if you continue this, I imagine it's even more, it's more salient in recent years with the macroeconomic slowdown, right? So you can think, working for the state is the 21st century class is still, the on the top of the hierarchy, and obviously have credentials. Having good credentials through this education system is essential to access the state sector jobs. And then the tournament is a very crucial, another very crucial aspect in the education system. So, what's a tournament? Tournament is a zero-sum game. It's about ranking, right? And there are at least two essential features of being a tournament. First is there should be relatively simple and transparent rules of deciding the ranking. Secondly, there should be measurable and objective criteria, right? Test score is such a criteria to rank people. And this is like the first lesson of tournament for most Chinese because we don't take sports when we were young. Right? So it's like the exam is the first time we encounter the tournament. What's special about being a tournament is that the selection is a very important function for the such a system. So it's a bit ironic. The education system is first served as a selection, second as an education. Education means that given your talent, there will be more value added through educating you. But the Chinese system would argue that the selection is very, very essential. It's even more important than the education function. And it's like diligence and intelligence. And it has many implications. It happened first very, very young, at a very early age, like, the Gaokao, the college entrance exam took place when you were age 18 or 19, right? And the school you attended and the major, the field you chose would loom large, throughout your life. And that has, different implications, has strengths and weaknesses. I can discuss more in the Q&A, for instance. A third or equally important characteristic of this system is a centralized system. So first, the exam system was designed not as an education system, it as a selection system for governance. It's to select the people that can help the state govern the society, right? So the central government, it plays the key role in deciding, setting up this rule. And obviously today, in today's system, think about it, the Gaokao is like certainly like annual tournament, right? That happened on the same days throughout the country, right? It's where the test subjects were carefully chosen and centralized, and the college admission is administered by the quota system, right? Decided by the central government. Also, the admission process is centralized. And the education system is centralized not only in terms of the Gaokao per se, in the whole administrative system, right, including college administration and pre-college administration. Right? So what's special about the Chinese system is that school officials would have equivalent bureaucratic ranks. It's very rare in other countries. And the school curricula are also centralized, which give the government leverage to decide what kind of ideology should be propagated to the young. And once you have this framework, you can use it to understand the behavior of families and the rulers and society. Why there's such obsession with this system? So for families, you would think it's rational to be obsessed in this system because families perceive if this hierarchical tournament, one score, 1 point would make a big difference for the children's life and career, right? But just for your information, the maximum score is 750 points. But people, families perceive that 1 point would matter a lot. Is this true or not? we did some study by looking at just say individuals around the elite college cutoff, just compare those 1 point below and 1 point above. And the left panel shows that the probability of being accepted by elite college. And you do say they matter. If you are 1 point above the cutoff, you are more likely to get into elite college. It also mattered 4 years later on the labor market. These people, those just get a bit lucky, get to the 1 point more, actually get a better job, a highly paid job, get a higher salary. So from families' perspective, they're obsessed with this because they want to invest so that their children can get 1 point more. This might make a difference in the future. And from the ruler's perspective, this is from history till today, this has been a very effective tool for governance. So there are several features that makes this as a useful tool for governance. Also for thousands of years, over thousands of years, these rules were kind of modified, improved, reformed by many, many rounds. So today it's become very sophisticated and cleverly designed in many aspects. So for instance, such a system gives perceived mobility to individuals and families, right? Even though exposed, the probability to go to an elite college is very, very small. Historically, it's even smaller. But exactly, it makes every family feel they have some chance. Right? This hope is very crucial. And if you feel in such a system, you would blame yourself, or you think your children is not working hard enough, or is not smart enough than your neighbor's children. Right? So that gives them, who borne the responsibility in such a system for success and failure. And if you become successful in the system, you would owe your power to the system rather than yourself. And from the state perspective, this gives the leverage to recruit talent throughout the country. In this sense, to have a quota system makes sense, right? Because this is a way to balance the power. From the state perspective, it's a good idea to have talents from different regions of the country. And it's also a good idea to give hope to people everywhere, right? But of course, some regions are politically more important than others. So you naturally want to give high quota to those regions, right? In the current situation, the metropolitan cities, Beijing and Shanghai, and the minority regions like Xinjiang and Tibet would naturally get higher quota per capita. Thinking like a state, this is a good strategy for political, for governance regions. Of course, this centralized curricula is a good way to think about which ideology to be diffused and to reach the young people. Right? So you think of yourself as a ruler. It's a good system, right? Even though for families, it could be a lot of pressure. And one could ask, what would happen if the exam system were abolished? Today we don't know, but historically we know, right? It happened once in 1905, it was abolished. So in some earlier work I did with Mike Walser, we do find that this contributed to the rise of instability in that era. And when this paper was published, it was used not to discuss historical China, but discuss today's America. But the message is that, for every society to give hope and give this possibility, perceived mobility to young people is very essential for political stability. And then from the society perspective, I want to emphasize that education affects society. It also reflects society. Such an education system does maybe affect the value system of the individual. This includes, you would have more respect for winners, and a limited sympathy for losing. Because you believe, if you have strong belief in such system, you would think, those who have high score and go to a better school is because they work hard, right? They perform good in this, they perform better in this tournament, right? And you'll naturally be skeptical of a welfare system. And this is actually reflected in many social surveys among the Chinese citizens. So then this raises a question about the future of China with more and more inequality. What would be the future if there's reform? What should China do? Obviously, such a system, this tournament, would naturally lead to this so-called evolution or inside rolling or 内卷. The idea is, of course, when more and more families get some resources, they all invest in this system just for ranking rather than for learning more. So naturally, it's leading to this very intensified competition. Now people complain a lot. And I also want to just highlight that education is not only affecting society, it also reflects the society. This kind of centralized hierarchical tournament is not only used in the Chinese education system, it's also used in the political tournament, right? So those, especially students who study like promotion, for instance, right? It's people will rank, the politicians will rank, could be ranked by their growth, or it could be ranked by COVID control, or by one-child policy implementation, but it's the same logic, even though the specific criteria used could change across different time periods. And it's also used in Chinese academia, where here it's like tenure is could be like 5 faculty could get a tenure together. But in China, the academia is first it's ranked, and there's a quota system. Right? If I get tenure, then you cannot get it because of the quota system. And it's look like more like a tournament than the U.S. academia. And it's also used a lot in business. I want to just clarify that the wide use of such a tournament is not because Chinese like a competition or like a tournament or like the exam system, right? They complain a lot. They see a lot of shortcoming of this system. But the logic is that people know in such a society, power is everywhere, right? Without this transparent rule, then power influence could be even more prevalent, right? The society would be even more unequal. So this is the kind of institutional design somehow to try to mitigate the influence of power in such a broad institutional setting. But I want to highlight that this system is clever in giving hope to all, but this does not mean that this gives equal chances to all. Right, so if there's a lot of inequality in the Chinese exam system, there's 3 key dimensions, again, which reflect the key dimensions of the whole society. The first is the regional quotas and the urban-rural gap and the family income. And in the quotas, I also already explained it's unfair, but there's political logic, right? From the ruler's perspective, if you became ruler, you also want to have such an unequal regional quota for your rule. And urban-rural gap is another important, gap everywhere in the Chinese society. And I shared I grew up in a rural village. So if you're curious, you can see how rural students like I, perform in this kind of system. And family income is obviously very important. So how unequal China's education is? We did some calculation to look at based on like a household survey, look at the probability of go to elite college, and we divide, say, Chinese families into 5 percentile or 5 groups. The 1 means the bottom 20% of the household, and the 5 is top 25% of the household. The first is the probability is low for every household because the chance is low. The second is it's unequal, right? The richer kids, the kids from richer families are about 3 times higher chance to get into elite college than the poor kids. How we started this compared with the US? There's already existing US data, so we just do the same calculation. And this elite college, you can think for both societies, roughly the top 100 university. I think UCSD is one of the elite in the US sample. And you'll see for the US, if you do the same calculation, I told you for China, the number is 3 times gap, right, from the rich to the poor. For the US system, it's 11 times. So yes, it's true that there's a lot of inequality in the Chinese exam system, but still more accessible than the US system. So let me just first summarize how we understand Chinese education system. I would summarize it as it's a centralized hierarchical tournament, and the exams are these means, are tools to implement such a system, right? So it's not the end; it's more to implement the tournament. And this is a very effective tool for governance. And everyone is giving hope, but not everyone is giving equal chances. So with this, so what does this imply for China's economic development and for U.S.-China competition? So I'll move to a few implications, and I'll look forward to your questions and more discussions. I'll try to be fast. So here is some cross-sectional cross-country figure. Look at the relationship between year of schooling and GDP per capita. And you see that in the 1980s, before China just started opening up, China is, has, in terms of schooling, is really lower than where it should be, right? And by 2010 and 2014, China already catch up and become, a bit like other parts of the world. So in terms of development, so if you just do a simple accounting to think about, how much the gap between rich and poor countries can be explained by education, the answer is about 1/3. Okay, so such education is important, even though it's not necessarily called or just simple counting. And if I think as a centralized hierarchical system, which has its strengths and weaknesses. So, of this centralized system, so in such a system, mistakes are costly, right? It's also difficult to predict the market forces. You can think, in recent years, the college graduate unemployment is a very important social issue. And this is partly related to this large-scale college expansion that started, in 1998 and 1999. Of course, but at that time, it's very difficult for the government to predict macroeconomic slowdown today, right? So it has these unexpected consequences. At the same time, a centralized system also has its strengths, right? It can quickly expand its education capacity, right? That's what happened in China. In 1999, every year there are about 1 million college graduates, people going to college, right? By 2010 and today, it's more than 10 million each year, right? Nowadays, it's at a global level, among all college graduates, at least 1 of 5 is in China. 1 out of 5 will graduate from China, right? It gives the country a lot of capacity. And another feature of the Chinese system is that there's a large share of students are studying STEM. In the US, there's a recent phenomenon. In China has been there, and even more so in recent years. And this is not because Chinese are good at STEM or love STEM more, right? It's largely because the state, they have the quota system, and they have a lot of capacity to influence individual choices. And just give you some number, as I said, this college expansion make a big difference. From 1999 till today's 10 times increase. And for the Chinese, STEM-made students account for about 50% of the student body, compared with the US is about 20 to 30%. Which means China has certainly more STEM talents in this age. Today the college-educated labor force in China is already higher than all the labor force in the US in terms of quantity. So it's certainly very impressive. And there's some estimate about the number of engineers and software developers. And China certainly has a lot of advantage in this strengths in this aspect. And what's even a bit more special is a lot of Chinese engineers are hardware engineers, whereas in the US, the majority are software engineers, right? This gives China some edge in this high-tech manufacturing competition. So then I want to touch a little bit this, we can continue debate on this. You hear this a lot whenever people talk about Chinese education or the exam system. You often hear some people hypothesize that, it stifles creativity. Just nowadays you listen to some podcasts, you always hear people say, Chinese are good at, from 1 to 100, this kind of incremental innovation, but not good at 0 to 1. I'm a bit skeptical about this. I want to say that is this the right question to ask? What is creativity? I think the word is too loaded. It's too vague to know what it is. More research is needs to be done in this front. I just want to share with you some very specific setting we are looking at and what we learned from that. one proxy for creativity is about entrepreneurship, for instance, right? Even though you can also think innovation is not creativity, and Nobel Prize is not the creativity. That's fine. But what I want to see in the data, you'll see if you can link like the administrative data of college entrance exam and the probability of creating forms in all these universal forms in China, their owners. You do see that on average, higher score students create fewer forms. Okay. First, the probability of entrepreneurship is very high. It's like every 100 Chinese graduates, they created about 7 forms. So it's very high in the world. And there's a negative relationship. High score individuals actually create fewer forms. You might think they are brainwashed or they lack entrepreneurial ability. But if you look at the underlying reason more carefully, if anything, it's actually high score individuals' forms are more successful in whatever way you can measure. The main reason they are less likely to create forms because they work for the government and other firms, right? If they have better alternative outside options, right? So what I take away from these findings is incentives are the driver, not necessarily creativity. But this is not a great, direct measure of creativity. So if more research on this would be very, very useful. But I want to also emphasize that it's more meaningful to talk about specific skills that get stifled from the exam system. I see at least 2 essential skills. One is the social skills and communication skills. As we know, they have always been valuable in the labor market, but more so in this age of AI and automation. I grew up in the system. If I had better communication skills, this talk would be much more fun. But anyway, I apologize for this. And then the second central skill is this courage to challenge your authority, right? And I think this is important for innovation and the leadership, but this is not, you cannot blame education alone, right? It's because education mirrors society. Even if you are educated in a different system, if you work, you get a job in a school or in a factory, the whole incentive system does not encourage you to challenge authority. So if you want to change this, just blaming the education system is not enough. Finally, I just touch on this, many of you would be even have more thoughts than I to think about the Chinese immigrants in the US. And there's a lot of debate, right? Obviously, these are two different systems. The exam system is based on this one test score, very well defined hierarchy, etc. Where in the US, there's multiple factors, and it also values diversity and the differences, and they're high in the national level cases against Harvard. There's local level school district conflict every day, and some economists, other people even find that there's white flight. So the idea is in Cabo Valley, there's so many Asian immigrants, and the competition is so high, and white people move away from Cabo Valley as a result. So what I just want to emphasize, what's the underlying factors, how we think about this suspicion toward affirmative action more specifically. I want to see that the exam culture is not only an institution, it's also almost like a moral framework. There are 3 factors that influence this kind of tension. One is this typical cultural transmission, right? If you grow up with such a culture, you bring the culture to another country. I think on top of this, there are 2 other reasons that strengthen this kind of value. One is survival bias. I think, like many of you, we actually we succeeded through the system, right? We naturally, if we are successful from a system, you naturally think it's kind of nice system. It's fair. It has this, virtue you want to defend. So it's we should be aware of the survival bias. The third is that this U.S. system it needs a lot of it's not too transparent criteria, which often needs a lot of social capital. But if you are immigrants, you naturally lack such a social capital, so you tend to be more suspicious of this more weak or more subjective criteria and wants to have the more objective criteria. I think it's useful to know the fundamental reason to really contribute to the debate, which is still relevant today. So I will shut up here. So here, this is the attempt to understand Chinese education system. It's a framework far from providing final answers. In writing this book, I'm kind of a little bit surprised that actually there's still many questions that remain to be answered by research and to think about how to reform this system. I think now it's time to really think about how to change the system, because the system used to work well, in my generation, the Dave's generation, some of you's generation, because at that time, families were poor, they were not, they all lacked resources to invest in this system. So it's effective, it's not so much pressure, but today, every family has some resources. Obviously, some families has much more resources. So now everyone is investing, and it leads to this over-investing, and this, a lot of waste, social waste that's needed to be changed to improve welfare. I'll shut up here.
Wow. There's a lot on the table here. There's so much material. It's super interesting. Let me start by asking you a really difficult question, and one that doesn't have a really clear answer, but I know you've been thinking about it as part of all this. You sort of started out telling us that China had this deep respect for education, and that was consistent with the hierarchical examination system. But there were a couple of points in your discussion where you treated the hierarchical examination system as something almost imposed on Chinese society by political authorities. And if we look at China and contrast it with the United States, of course we have these very different attitudes towards education. For sure, that's real. But we also have a real difference where China, the Chinese Communist Party, sort of wants us to think of a single hierarchy in China. Whereas the United States, there's lots of different. You sort of get to choose which playground you want to play in, or you want to. So as you think about all this, I mean, where do you, to what extent do you think of the respect for education and the hierarchy as being sort of positive, mutually reinforcing things? And to what extent do you think of them as being somewhat in tension, and the hierarchy being imposed on people who, as you said, are used to unrestrained power and therefore welcome a little bit of transparency and clarity and predictability? That's a super hard.
First I want to just echo that the fact, U.S. education system, the university is also super hierarchical. That said, there's still a difference, right? The China, as Barry said, the Chinese system is very uniform and very steep, hierarchy. And from the state perspective, it's not bad for governance. People are busy competing with each other. In fact, if anything, the state seems to be making this system, kind of more and more hierarchical. After all, Chinese education system is public system, right? You can think it's more actually fair to compare this with the European system, which is public. Most of them are public system, except for the UK. Whereas the US system, the private and the market plays a very large role, which naturally forms some hierarchy. So it's a bit ironic that the Chinese public system is so hierarchical. So I think that's actually the fundamental reason of all this waste and overinvestment in the system. I think from the government perspective, even though politically it's a good idea, people are busy competing and preparing for the test, but from economic perspective, it's certainly a lot of waste of time. I think the government also realized this waste. That's why they have this policy of, say, ban tutoring or, say, ban certain extracurricular teaching. But all of this backfired. It just didn't work. If anything, it makes things worse, right? I think it's not that the government didn't realize it's a social waste. It's just the remedy they provided are wrong. And to really change these fundamental things to make this structure a bit flat and not so steep, right?
It's your recommendation.
Yeah, my recommendation.
It's not a tendency.
No. In fact, unfortunately, with the U.S.-China competition, this makes things worse because the government really wants to build this world-leading university. So there's this opposite push. So it makes things even worse.
And at the same time, I'll ask one related question and then we'll open it up to the floor. At the same time, then, the other lesson that people draw from this is that if you have very clear rules, then you can sort of reverse engineer them and figure out how to get ahead in the system, right? And the system doesn't always work in the way it's supposed to. For instance, you used the example of Shanghai when you were discussing regional quotas. You said regional quotas would mean that Shanghai and other advanced areas, we wouldn't dominate the system. But actually there's a pervasive perception, I don't know if it's true or not, maybe you can tell us, that people in Shanghai actually have it easier in terms of getting into elite schools because they have sort of special quotas and special programs.
Yeah.
So is that an accidental outcome or a necessary escape valve?
No, yeah, it's two-dimensional designing the quota. First, you want to have a quota. You want to have a quota system. You are a ruler, not the family. I don't want to have a quota system. I'm from Shandong, as you know. I hate the quota system. But if you are the ruler, you want to have a quota system, and you want to have quota for every province. That's the thing. You want to give hope to every region, right? You don't want people from Xinjiang has no hope, right? That's the logic. You want to have it everywhere. That's why in fact, the starting point of the quota system in the Ming Dynasty is because the southerners performed so well and got all the spots, and the northerners protested, right? And the emperor has designed the quota system. When within given such a system, everywhere has some quota, then where you want to give more quota, and that would be the more politically important region. And Shanghai and Beijing are politically more important. Similarly, the Xinjiang, Tibet, Qinghai, these are more politically important. In fact, it's much easier to get into elite college if you're from Xinjiang than you're from the middle provinces with Han, as the most of the population. That's like Henan, Shandong, Guangdong, Anhui. These are the bottom. Those lose out from this quota allocation.
So it's a feature, not a bug.
Yeah, it's a feature.
Okay, so I'm going to open up the floor, and those of you online, please use the question box, and we will gather your questions and have them forwarded to me. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you so much. It's a very amazing book, and I can echo everything because I'm from Henan, and I can totally understand what you mean. And one more question I want to ask is that, in the past days, the Gaokao had two different tracks from the arts and the science, right? And now more and more provinces, almost all the provinces have reformed that students can pick what they want from the combination different disciplines. And what do you think that will change the system and the hierarchical system we just mentioned?
I think the system has also marginal improvement in different dimensions. What you mentioned, I see that as marginal improvement, even though it didn't change the whole picture, because the college, the college slots, how many would study STEM, but some still centralized allocation. But there are marginal improvement in many dimensions. For instance, in my age, I'm old. In my time, the computer power is not. We even don't have computer for the admission process. So we only allowed to have three choices in your college application. Now it's has 20 or even more, hundreds of kind of choices, right? These are all marginal improvement in this system. But the whole picture, the key issue actually hasn't been addressed.
Yeah.
Yes, I have a question. Thank you for the lecture, really appreciate it. One of the points you made was that they all have hope all around the country, but the opportunity is not equal. I think that was one of your key points. And I assume that's because in some places, the educational system, there are just better professors or better teachers, they have extra money to go get tutoring, etc. Is that the reason that the opportunity is not the same, is because of the opportunity to get educated at the same level?
Yes, that's the pre-college education is very equally very unequal, and it's becoming more and more unequal. So, for instance, in my time, but also for people around my age, a bit older, it's still common for people from a county, like a rural county, go to. There's only one high school in the county. People go there. The good students can still go to Beijing and Tsinghua. Now it's much more difficult because the good teacher there would be recruited by better schools in the city and get much better paid.
Okay.
Indeed, they have much fewer resources and the teacher quality declined a lot. And that's that's if you see the school, if you see students, but maybe not here, but you see that those educated in elite high school, they speak English as native speaker do, right? And they are all very high, have a high caliber, etc. But where if you're growing in a rural county or rural village, you just have much fewer resources. Right? I have never met any foreigners before college.
So in a sense that, just to continue with just a little bit more on that question. So the quota system, in a sense, is a way to compensate a little bit for that, right? Maybe you don't compensate 100%, but the government is accepting people from the other regions where the students are less well educated, in a sense, to give them at least some hope, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't compensate 100% in that you don't get the same percentages of people, but you get some.
Yeah, that's why the system still now is no. If you ask, say we should abolish. If you propose we should abolish the system, then no one would. No one, but it's very few Chinese would accept that. They're still defending the system despite all this inequality. So my point is that it's used to work well, the system, right? It's exactly because these features you were talking about. It just now with more and more costs for so many families, it seems to be the time to think how to improve this.
And you looked at all about comparison with, say, other Asian countries like Japan, South Korea, and so forth, which have had this system, but in certain ways, because when they followed, it wasn't like this. But they've had it longer, and now it's sort of evolved there, and the public opinion is more complicated about it, kind of an evolution. Is that the future of China, or is it the same pretty much as China today?
We haven't looked at that. I would love to learn more and thinking about this comparison. The book was too much focused on China and the US. We didn't even compare with Europe. Now, we should think more about the Asian neighbors. That said, I think the point is that the education system reflects the society. Right. In that sense, I think that the different political institutions matter in terms of how in shaping the evolution of the education system. It's a weak answer, but I would love to think more and to learn more about the neighbors.
How much does the personal context actually affect the outcome in terms of people knowing people and being able to use that favoritism in any way? Is that an issue, or is there penalties for that?
Yeah, there's because it's so high stake, right? It's even though I told you it's sophisticated, it has very sophisticated design or deterrent corruption, etc. There's always very strong incentive to think about some way to take advantage of the system. For instance, a few years ago, there was a policy to say, because people see the shortcoming of the test, right? Too much teaching to the test. So there was a proposal say maybe let's give colleges a bit more autonomy, to recruit students. So there's a program to say, they could select a small share of students based on their other sets of talents, not necessarily the golf score. And you can imagine this become a disaster because it's become a possibility for crime. But there's always such incentive, including I told you because it's easier to get into elite college in Xinjiang. You can imagine families trying to educate their children in Shandong and let them go to take the exam in Xinjiang. It's not easy. You have to bribe different people but there always such incentive. But the thinking of the society is that without this, things will be even more corruption and collusion.
And is it true that there are still sort of bonus points for certain things?
Yeah, there's still bonus
which
points.
could be
Yeah,
political.
there are also some bonus point. Even I say this myself. It's like we even have some research showing that people change their ethnic status to be ethnic minority because the Chinese also has a formative action which give extra points to minority students, and people are willing to change their ethnic identity for that that extra points. And obviously, it's people who have resources and connections who can change their identity easily. So all this is the exception prove the rule in some sense because so high stake. So families spend everything they can to increase the chance a little bit.
And you'd say there's a near consensus feeling in Chinese society that is basically fair.
People realize it's more and more unfair because of the children.
Yeah, but the exam itself.
Yes, I think still, despite all this effort to try to get some advantage, still taking as this exam based. So, for instance, another analogy is when you go to say interview for civil service, you also have a civil service exam, and the typical perception is that the exam stage was fair. However, there's the interview stage, and people know that stage was intended for favoritism of people, which is exactly opposite to the US system, right? You like interview, you like talking with people, but in China, it's also true that you have more personal influence during the interview stage.
I predict that students from multi-sibling families will get bonus in the future. But I have a short comment and a question. The comment is about, you highlighted several inequalities, rural, urban, regional, and family. One form of inequality, is age discrimination. Because in China, the college system, exam system, is such that you have to be in that age cohort. And then once you miss that train, you're done. And I've taught students who are older than me, right, in college. But in China, that's very rare. So that kind of inequality, age-based, is pretty serious. I mean,
I don't think this is the case because someone could correct me. By design, there is no age limitation on how you can take the exam.
But you have to be some sort of in-depth or there are
There are a lot of repeated takers of the exam. But in fact, this is again by design. Historically, it's even more by design in the sense they want to give you hope. So if you repeatedly want to take the exam, that's good for the system. So in fact, there's no age limitation. I think it's more like a rational choice. Also, you would worry not about your college part. It's more about the labor market has age discrimination. If you already you are a fresh graduate of age 30, you'll be discriminated there. But the exam system, in fact, allowed for repeated taker, and repeated taker account for 20% of the student exam taker. And it's also, they encourage you to do so because it gives you hope, right? It's a system encourage effort, right? So that's and it's very interesting because it's the tutoring. If you see what's special about such a system, is not that if you are good at something, you don't tutor on what you are good at. It's tutor on what you are bad at. So it's a lot of this. Encourage hard work, working on things you are not good at, which you can imagine is a different system where you encourage people working on what they are good at. What does that mean, right? Yeah.
So my question.
Okay, quick question.
My question is, I think that your idea of exam as selection mechanism, that's very exciting. And I can see that coach tutor is all about that. But now in this age, after 1905, especially now, with education being basically democratized, mass education, and then selection, there's all this government, so people, all this, they are doing the selection from this vast pool of people. But education has become a little decoupled from the selection in the historically. What do you?
No, this is more like I would say this hierarchy of this college, like this higher, better schools are selecting people based on their intelligence and diligence. That's the very important. It's not, you can think without Tsinghua should be a good college because they teach us more, right? Give us more value added. It's not true. It's actually we selected already very, very good people, right? Some professor, I think Yao Yang, he claimed that Peking University students have IQ of 130 or something. I was still pretty impressed, but anyway. So I just think that that's in that sense. It's high. It's not that you learn more from without. It's more about you are already very good and from very good family, and that's me. But yeah.
I think we've got time for two more questions. One in the back there, and then we've got one online. Go ahead, please.
So thank you. I actually come from a college of somewhere, and it says that in the current society, we assume that the post-college education serves like a giant daycare for everyone, and college education serves as a selection for pennies. Well, in China, we can see the opposite, that the college education seems selecting the needs, while the college education serves like a daycare for colleges. And my question is that, so I think a potential expansion or like an encounter for this research can be extended to like how people perform after this experiment is over. For instance, we assume like average Chinese universities have lower rankings using for US compared to their counterparts in the US or other Western democracies. Is that because they just have worse professors there, or is it because students after making suitable tournament feel like they can relax and they have freedom to fight and enjoy their lives in universities? So
Let's take two questions.
Okay.
So we're gonna take one more question, and then she'll answer both of you together.
Sure. So, Xiaodong Zhang asks online a big question to end with: the degree to which you would attribute sort of social malaise problems like low birth rate or youth unhappiness to the Gaokao system?
Good question.
Okay.
More specific, I heard.
Yeah. So first is, indeed, as you said, the graduation rate as you may know, in China, is Chinese university is super high. It's almost 99%. I think one year, one college has like 95% graduation rate, which became a scandal. Whereas here, it's often like colleges have graduation rate like 60%, etc. And then, so that's, related to what you said, you are promised a college degree. So this, again, it's a selection, people evaluate you, look at your CV, basically look at your first degree, right? If you get into a good college, they know you performed well in the Gaokao, and they know you're either intelligent or diligent, right? So that's the logic here. And I don't know whether I would propose that the Chinese college graduation rate should be lower. It's already very intense competition, and this related to the unhappiness in the young. And if they have to do this for another 4 years, I think there will be a more crisis for the youth. So I think the fundamental reason is more to think about to make this, as I said, the reason is the competition is and the pressure is so intensive that this one point make a big difference in your life. I think to change this is really the fundamental solution of all this high pressure, etc. I think that I don't have research on this. I wish I had for the education triggered this pressure and also cost, right? It's also ironic because Chinese college is very cheap compared with the US university, right? Very cheap to attend. But why education system is so costly? Because you want to have your private resources there for the tournament, right? So I think it's contributed to all this pressure, and especially young people's unhappiness. I think, for some of you doing some research on this would be very, very valuable.
Wow. We could go on for a long time, but we have to wrap up right at 5, and it is right at 5. Let me just draw everybody's attention to two quick things. First is the next talk on February 5th, The Struggle for Hong Kong. This is a talk by Qingquan Li. who is very, very qualified to talk about this subject and a fascinating scholar. The last and final thing is there are books available outside, and I don't know if you noticed, but Rashek cleverly told you that the book is short, easy to read. It has no equations or tables of any kind in it, so that should increase your incentive to buy this wonderful book. Everybody, thank you very much.
And she's ready to sign.
That's right.